Snow pounded the cliffs like a war drum, and in the darkness, Daniel heard it. Emily's faint cry swallowed by the storm, a sound so desperate it froze his blood. This is the story of Daniel Brooks, a Marine scarred by war, and Rex, the abandoned German shepherd who led him into a storm to save an 18-year-old girl, unraveling a bond, a miracle, and a second chance at life. Before we begin, tell me what moment in this story touches your heart the most. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more emotional rescue tales. Snow smothered the coastline of Portland, Maine, turning the world into a white silence pierced only by the distant roar of the Atlantic. The storm had rolled in early that season, heavy and unforgiving, swallowing the small seaside town in a curtain of frozen breath. Inside a wooden cabin perched on a wind-bitten hillside, Daniel Brooks sat alone in the dim glow of a single lamp. He was 37, tall with square shoulders and a build carved from years of military discipline. His face held sharp lines hardened by war, a strong jaw shadowed by days of unshaved stubble, and eyes of flint gray that rarely softened. He had left the Marine Corps 4 months earlier, but his spirit still carried the weight of deserts, explosions, sleepless nights, and the unspoken names of the men he failed to bring home. The silence of civilian life pressed against him like an ill-fitting armor. Daniel leaned back in his chair and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He had not slept more than 2 hours straight in weeks. Nightmares did not visit like storms anymore. They visited like old companions who knew exactly where to sit inside his chest and breathe heavy until he woke in a cold sweat. He tried reading. He tried tea. He tried sitting in stillness. Nothing ever quieted his mind for long. Outside, the wind slammed against the walls with a force that rattled the old nails. Snow swirled past the windows in frantic spirals. The world looked like it was being erased, grain by grain. Daniel reached for the mug beside him. The coffee inside had long gone cold, but he sipped it anyway, letting the bitterness anchor him to the present. Then he heard it. It was faint at first, so light he thought it belonged to his imagination. A small trembling sound, carried by the wind yet not belonging to it. Daniel froze, tilting his head. The storm raged harder. He heard it again. A whimper. Thin. Weak. Not the voice of a person, and not the cry of a wild animal. Something was outside. Old instincts flared awake inside Daniel, the kind that came from scanning ruined buildings for survivors or listening for breaths under rubble. Without hesitation, he stood, grabbed his winter coat, and pulled it tight as he stepped toward the door. The cabin creaked under the pressure of the cold when he opened it. A blast of icy air hit him like a blade. Snow whipped across the porch. The lamps along the railing quivered in the wind. Daniel narrowed his eyes and listened. There, beneath the steps. He crouched and lifted the flashlight. Its beam wavered with the gusts until it found a small, shivering shape wedged under the bottom stair. A German shepherd puppy, barely 4 months old, pressed itself into the tightest corner it could find, as though it wanted to disappear. Mud matted its fur. Ice clung to its legs. Its ribs showed through its thin coat. Its breathing came in short, panicked bursts. For a long moment, neither Daniel nor the pup moved. The storm howled around them, yet in that still second, the world felt impossibly quiet. The puppy raised its head slowly. Its eyes were a soft amber but dull from exhaustion. There was a silent apology in them, a silent plea. Daniel felt something inside his chest contract. He knew that look. He had seen it in young soldiers wounded in places they did not expect pain to reach. He lowered his voice, letting warmth seep into it. You are all right now. Easy there. I am not going to hurt you. The puppy tried to shrink further, but its limbs were too weak. Daniel extended one hand, palm open. The cold stung his fingers, but he held still. Patience. Wait for the creature to choose trust. He breathed slow and steady. Minutes passed like hours, snow collected on his shoulders. The puppy finally lifted its muzzle and nudged his fingers. A tiny gesture, a silent surrender, a fragile thread of hope. Daniel moved slowly and scooped the small body into his arms. He felt the trembling instantly, violent, exhausted, terrified. The puppy weighed almost nothing. It pressed its face into his coat, as if trying to hide from the world itself. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside where warm light flickered across the wooden walls. The storm outside roared, but the cabin held its warmth like a sanctuary. Daniel carried the puppy to the fireplace and set it gently near the hearth. The pup collapsed onto the rug, breathing in small, uneven gasps. Daniel removed his coat, wrapped it around the fragile creature, and crouched beside it. He watched its sides rise and fall in shallow rhythm. He could see mud stuck between its paws, a faint tear in one ear, and a small tick clinging behind its neck. A life too young to know such fear. "You have been out there a while, little one," he murmured. He fetched a towel, warm water, and cleaned the mud from its fur. The puppy tried to stand, but its legs buckled, and it fell with a soft cry. Daniel placed a steady hand on its back. "Not yet. Just breathe." Hours passed. The fire glowed red and gold. Daniel stayed awake beside the puppy, refusing to let the cold claim it. As the storm battered the cabin, his thoughts drifted back to the desert. To nights when he waited beside wounded comrades, feeling their breaths in the dark, hoping each inhale would not be the last. He remembered a dog, too, a trained K9 named Rex, who had once shielded him from shrapnel during a blast. Rex had not survived that day. Daniel buried him with shaking hands and carried that loss like a stone in his chest ever since. When dawn finally arrived, the storm softened to a whisper. The first pale light slid into the cabin through the frosted window. Daniel blinked his tired eyes and looked down. The puppy was curled against his leg, warm and breathing steadily. Its tiny body pressed close as if afraid he would disappear if it let go. Daniel felt the faintest smile touch his lips, something he had not felt in months. "Rex," he whispered softly. "Your name is Rex." The puppy stirred, but did not move away. Daniel did not know it yet, but saving this little life would open a door he never expected to walk through again. Morning light filtered weakly through the frost-covered window of the cabin, turning the interior into a muted glow of gray and gold. The storm had passed, but the cold remained sharp, a biting presence that clung to every surface. Daniel Brooks stirred from the chair beside the hearth, where he had slept in fragments through the night. When he looked down at the small bundle curled in his coat, Rex lifted his head with a soft blink, as if waking from a distant place. The puppy's breaths were steadier now, though its ribs still rose sharply beneath thin fur, proof of the long hours it had fought against the cold. Daniel rubbed the sleep from his eyes, his hand automatically resting on Rex's back. The movement felt natural, instinctive, like reaching for a rifle in the dark. But this time it was gentler. The puppy's body leaned into the touch, craving warmth more than confidence. Daniel took a slow breath. For a man who had spent years on foreign soil fearing explosions beneath his feet, the small weight of a dog against his palm felt strangely grounding. A firm knock sounded at the door. Daniel straightened, tension coursing through his posture before common sense returned. Not danger. Probably help. He pulled the coat tighter around his shoulders and opened the door to a gust of frigid air and a woman standing against it with calm steadiness. "Mr. Brooks," she said with a warm tone despite the biting cold. "I'm Margaret Hayes, Portland Animal Rescue." She offered a small smile as she stepped inside. Margaret was a woman of about 45, tall and slender with a composed grace to her movements. Her face had gentle lines that deepened when she smiled, and her skin carried the pale tones of someone accustomed to Maine winters. Her hair, a shoulder-length brown streaked with gray, was tied back neatly under a knitted cap. She had the eyes of someone who had spent years looking at frightened animals and learning how to speak their language without words. Calm, patient, certain. Daniel nodded in greeting. Margaret looked around the cabin with a quiet appreciation for its simplicity. A stove, a small table, stacked firewood, a shelf of old marine memorabilia. Her gaze softened when she spotted Rex near the hearth. She stepped closer, her boots crunching lightly on the wooden floor. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered as she knelt, careful and slow. "You've had a hard night." Rex stiffened immediately. His ears flattened and his body trembled, but Daniel's hand rested gently along his spine, and the pup eased in tiny degrees. Margaret observed this with an attentive tilt of her head. "He trusts you," she said softly. "That happens sometimes. Not often. But when it does, it means something." Daniel felt something flicker in his chest. Pride? Responsibility? He did not yet know. Margaret pulled off her gloves and examined Rex without touching him at first. A practiced eye traced the puppy's condition. Thin, dehydrated, frostbite narrowly avoided, scarring along one ear suggesting a possible encounter with another dog or a sharp object. She clicked her tongue softly. "Likely abandoned after the cold set in. Happens more than people admit. Folks get hunting dogs or herding puppies, then realize they are too much work. You found him just in time." Daniel crouched beside her. He was under the porch, completely frozen. His voice carried a heaviness beneath it, the tone of a man who had seen too many beings suffer too much. Margaret nodded slowly. "He's alive because of you. But I have to ask, do you intend to surrender him to the center or something else?" Rex pressed himself closer to Daniel in answer. Margaret noticed and smiled with quiet understanding. "I can keep him for now," Daniel said, "until he's stronger." Margaret studied him for a moment. Her gaze did not judge. It measured. "You're a veteran, aren't you?" Daniel hesitated. "Marine Corps. 13 years. She nodded knowingly, as if that small truth explained 1,000 silent things at once. People who worked with wounded animals often understood wounded humans, too. "All right," she said gently. "I'll put him under temporary personal care. But only if you promise to care for him properly. Dogs like him will choose one person with everything inside them. If they choose wrong, it breaks them." Daniel looked down at Rex. The pup's amber eyes blinked up with an exhaustion so deep it almost felt ancient. "He deserves better than what he's had," Daniel murmured. Margaret stood, brushing snow from her coat. "Then you're already doing more than enough." After she left, the cabin seemed warmer. The storm clouds had thinned outside, allowing sunlight to spill over the snow. Inside, Rex attempted to stand again, failing at first, then steadying as Daniel guided him. They moved slowly across the cabin floor, the pup's paws sliding awkwardly on the wood. Daniel supported him with patient steadiness. Later, when Daniel chopped firewood outside, Rex watched from the doorway, his small head tilted with interest, ears twitching every time the axe struck the log. His legs were still shaky, but he wanted to follow, wanted to understand the man who had lifted him from the cold. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. "Not yet, soldier. You're still on light duty." Rex sneezed at the falling snow and wagged his tail once, weakly but deliberately. Daniel felt something warm rise in him, a feeling he had not let himself experience in months. A smirk tugged at his lips. Through the afternoon, Rex grew steadier. He wandered clumsily around the cabin, sniffing at boots, blankets, and the cold metal of Daniel's old service tags hanging near the door. When a pan clattered in the kitchen, Rex startled violently, then hurried to Daniel's side, leaning against his leg. That movement struck Daniel deeply. The puppy was looking for safety, and it had chosen him as the source of it. As night approached, the sky darkened to navy blue. Snow began falling again, softly this time, like ash descending from a quiet sky. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, while Rex curled at his feet. The fire crackled, filling the room with amber flickers. Near midnight, Rex jerked awake, paws twitching. A small whimper escaped him. Daniel reached down, resting his palm on the tiny chest. "You're safe," he whispered. "We both are." Rex's breathing slowed, his trembling eased, and he sank against Daniel's boot, as if anchoring himself to a harbor after a long storm. Two damaged beings, each carrying battles no one else could see, now sharing the same small circle of light in a winter storm. In that flickering glow, their broken edges began to fit together like driftwood washed ashore by the same tide. Winter deepened over Portland, with a sharpness that felt almost personal. The sky sank under the weight of a heavy Canadian front, pushing walls of snow toward the coastline. Streets that usually glowed with warm shop lights were now empty, swallowed by gusts of white. Even the ocean seemed subdued, waves breaking like muted shadows against the freezing shore. Inside his cabin, Daniel Brooks tightened the last buckle on his winter vest as he prepared to take Rex outside for a short walk. Since Margaret's visit, the puppy's strength had improved day by day. Rex was no longer trembling constantly, though the slight frailness in his frame still reminded Daniel how close the pup had come to the edge. Tonight, Rex stood alert near the door, ears up, tail still, watching him with a quiet patience that looked far too mature for a young dog. The shrill ring of the landline cut through the storm's low growl. Daniel's brows knit instinctively. Calls after dark were rare in these parts, and never meant anything simple. He lifted the receiver. "Daniel, it's Tom." The voice on the other end carried urgency. Tom Harris was Daniel's closest neighbor, a man in his early 50s with a broad frame, softened by years of physical work, and a friendly nature shaped by raising 3 children on his own after losing his wife to illness. Tom's deep voice usually held humor, but tonight it trembled with concern. "What's going on?" Daniel asked. "A girl's missing. Emily Parker, 18. Didn't make it home from the library. The sheriff is gathering volunteers. They think she may have been caught in the storm." Daniel felt a coldness deeper than the weather settle in his chest. He knew Emily only in passing, but remembered her well. She was a slender, bright-eyed girl with long golden hair she often wore tucked inside a wool cap. Her smile, warm and effortless, had always reminded Daniel of summer days that seemed out of place in Maine's long winters. She worked part-time at the bakery in town and had once helped Daniel choose a gift for Tom's youngest daughter. Emily had a soft-spoken kindness, the kind of gentle warmth that made the world feel less harsh. The thought of her alone in a blizzard, frightened and freezing, made Daniel's jaw tighten. "I'm heading down," Daniel said. He hung up and grabbed his flashlight, emergency pack, and thick coat. As he slipped on gloves, Rex paced anxiously near the door. The puppy's amber eyes locked onto him with unusual intensity. Daniel clipped a small emergency light to his belt. When he reached for the door, Rex suddenly froze, ears pricking forward as if catching something carried by the wind. "What is it?" Daniel murmured. Rex inhaled sharply, nose lifted toward the storm. Then, without warning, he bolted into the blinding snow, his paws cutting small but determined marks across the white crust. "Rex, come back!" Daniel shouted. But the puppy did not look back. His small form vanished down the hill faster than Daniel believed possible. Panic flared inside him. He sprinted into the gale, boots sinking deep with each step as snowflakes whipped against his face like shards of glass. The wind blared around him, but he could still hear Rex's barking, sharp and steady. It was not the frightened yapping of a young dog. It sounded older, deeper, almost trained. As if something within Rex had awakened the moment the storm carried Emily's scent past him. Daniel's mind raced. How could the puppy know? What was he chasing? He pushed harder through the drifts, breath burning in his lungs. His vision blurred from the cold, but he kept moving, tracking the sound of Rex's voice like a lifeline. The trees appeared suddenly, dark shapes rising through the snow as he entered the wooded slope leading toward the rocky shoreline. The ocean's rumble vibrated faintly beneath the storm. Rex's barking grew louder, more urgent. Daniel stumbled over a fallen branch, righted himself, and charged deeper into the trees. Then he saw him. Rex stood firm near the base of a broken pine trunk, his young frame tense but unyielding, tail raised, chest heaving as he barked at the darkness beyond. Snow swirled around him like smoke around a flame. Daniel rushed forward and dropped to his knees in the snow. There, curled against the trunk, lay Emily Parker. Her face was pale under the frost, framed by strands of long blonde hair frozen into thin ribbons. Her cheeks were drained of color, and her lips were a trembling blue. She wore a navy winter coat dusted with snow, and one of her mittens was missing, leaving a raw red scratch across her hand. Her breathing was shallow, barely noticeable under the layers of ice crystals settling on her collar. "Oh God," Daniel breathed. Emily's eyes fluttered open, glazed with exhaustion. When she saw him, her relief was faint but present. Her voice cracked. "I slipped. Snow was too deep." Daniel checked her pulse, weak but present. He wrapped his coat around her, locking in as much heat as he could. Rex stayed at her side, positioning himself between her and the direction of the tracks nearby. Daniel noticed them, wolf prints, large, fresh, leading back into the darker woods. A chill traveled down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Good boy," Daniel whispered to Rex. "You kept her safe." Rex lowered his head and let out a low, quiet sound, almost a reassurance. Daniel lifted Emily into his arms. She weighed little, her body limp with fatigue. Her head rested against his shoulder as he secured her with his coat. Her breath brushed weakly against his neck. "We're getting you home," he said firmly. The wind pushed against him with relentless force as he carried her back through the trees. Rex stayed close, occasionally looking over his shoulder into the dark woods, as if expecting eyes to appear from within. The storm raged around them, but Daniel moved with steady purpose, guided by the same instincts that had carried him out of fire zones overseas. Tom and several volunteers were already at the trailhead when Daniel emerged. Their flashlights cut through the swirling snow. Tom's wide face crumpled in relief when he saw Emily in Daniel's arms. "Thank the Lord," Tom said, hurrying forward. "Get her to the truck. Heater's on." Daniel handed her over gently. Emily's mother arrived moments later, a small woman with tired eyes and silver streaks in her hair, collapsing into tears as she held her daughter's hand. Rex sat at Daniel's boots, his body finally relaxing, though his amber eyes remained fixed on Emily until the doors closed. Rex had found her, and he had stood guard. For the first time since he rescued the puppy, Daniel understood something clearly. Saving Rex had not been an ending. It had been the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. And tonight, because of that, a life had been pulled back from the snow. Snow lingered along the edges of Portland's streets like a veil the storm had forgotten to carry away. The hospital lights cast a warm glow across the icy parking lot as Daniel Brooks stepped through the glass doors, breath still visible in the cold. Inside, the sterile brightness and soft echo of footsteps felt strangely soothing. After the desperate hours in the storm, this calm felt unreal. Emily Parker had been brought in only minutes before, weak and freezing, but still alive. Daniel sat in the waiting area, Rex curled at his boots like a protective shadow. The puppy had refused to leave his side since the rescue, as if guarding not just Emily, but Daniel himself from lingering danger. A door opened, and a doctor stepped out. She was a woman in her late 40s, short and sturdily built, with sandy blonde hair tied into a low bun. Her name badge read, Dr. Linda Marsh. Her round face, slightly flushed from long hours on duty, carried a mixture of professionalism and genuine compassion. Linda had worked Portland General for over 20 years and had seen far more accidents during winter storms than she cared to count. Her voice was steady but warm. "She's stable," Linda said, approaching Daniel. "Mild hypothermia, some bruising, but no lasting damage. She's lucky someone found her when they did." Daniel nodded, relief loosening the tightness in his chest. Linda's gaze shifted to Rex, and her stern expression softened into a smile. "Is this the hero everyone's talking about?" Rex lifted his head, ears tilting slightly, eyes steady and alert. Linda chuckled. "Well, he looks the part." Before Daniel could respond, Emily's parents rushed down the hall. Her mother, Grace Parker, was a petite woman with silver strands threaded through her dark hair, her face lined not by age but by years of raising 3 children with unwavering devotion. Her father, John Parker, stood taller, broad-shouldered with a neatly trimmed beard peppered in gray. His eyes showed both fear and gratitude as he clutched his wife's hand. "Mr. Brooks," John said, turning to Daniel. "Thank you. We heard it was your dog who found her." Daniel shook his head. "Rex led me there. I only carried her out." Grace knelt before Rex, fingertips trembling as she reached toward him. "You saved my daughter." Her voice cracked softly. "Thank you, sweetheart." Rex did not flinch. He simply observed her with calm understanding, then gently pressed his nose into her palm. Grace burst into tears, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. That night, as Emily slowly regained consciousness, she whispered to her parents, "I heard barking. Then he stood in front of me. He didn't let anything come near." Word spread quickly after that. By morning, local newspapers and neighborhood chatter carried stories of the abandoned puppy who saved the Parker girl. Coffee shops filled with murmurs of awe. Children drew pictures of Rex and taped them to storefront windows. Portland was a small town. Stories like this became its heartbeat. 3 days later, as snow fell lightly over the hills, Daniel chopped wood outside his cabin while Rex sniffed the fresh powder nearby. A car approached slowly up the winding path. The engine shut off, and a tall man stepped out. He wore a thick navy uniform coat with a gold badge pinned to the chest. His name was Chief Jacob Mills. Jacob was 52, with a weathered face shaped by years of policing Maine's rugged towns. His jaw was strong, lined with a hint of stubble, and his hair, once black, had turned salt and pepper along the temples. He had the gaze of someone who had seen more than he ever told others, the sort of man whose kindness was often wrapped in sternness. He had lost his younger brother in a maritime accident 20 years earlier, and had dedicated his life to protecting those who wandered too close to danger. That tragedy still lived behind his eyes, quietly shaping the gentleness beneath his gruff exterior. "Afternoon, Brooks," Jacob called, stepping toward the porch. "We need to talk about your dog." Rex immediately placed himself between Daniel and Jacob, body poised but not aggressive. Jacob paused, raising both hands in calm reassurance. "Easy there, soldier," he said softly. Daniel wiped the snow from his gloves and approached. "Is there a problem?" "Not a problem," Jacob replied, voice steady. "Just protocol. A dog involved in a rescue has to be checked, documented, and approved for private ownership. We need to make sure everything is legal. Last thing I want is city regulations to take him from you." Daniel felt tension in his gut. "He's staying with me." Jacob studied him for a long moment. His sharp blue-gray eyes softened. "I can see that." He glanced down at Rex. "And he isn't exactly eager to leave." Rex remained still, but his eyes never left the chief. Jacob knelt slowly, mindful not to appear threatening. "You've got a protector on your hands," he said. "Some animals are born with it. Most learn it. A few seem to carry it like a calling." He rose again. "I'll help with the paperwork. We'll make it stick." Daniel exhaled slightly, not realizing how tightly he had been holding his breath. When Jacob left, another car approached the cabin. This time it was Margaret Hayes. She stepped out with her familiar calm smile, bundled in a thick scarf and gloves. "I heard what happened," Margaret said as she walked up the steps. "Seems someone earned quite a reputation." Rex trotted to her with a wag of his tail, something Daniel had rarely seen. Margaret knelt and rested her hand atop his head. "You chose well, Rex," she whispered. "Not everyone finds their person this early." Daniel stood quietly, listening to the simple truth in her words. The fire of the setting sun spread across the cabin walls, casting warm gold over everything. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel felt stillness inside himself. A peace that didn't come from silence or isolation, but from connection. In that moment, standing with Margaret and Rex beside him, he realized something he had forgotten how to feel. He was home. Winter loosened its grip on Portland, just enough for the townspeople to gather at the oceanfront square without sinking into snowdrifts. The Atlantic wind still cut sharp, carrying the taste of salt and cold iron, but the crowd stood shoulder to shoulder in heavy coats and wool hats. The sea behind them rolled in long, dark waves, like a slow heartbeat echoing the moment. A small wooden platform had been built near the old lighthouse, its paint chipped and its lantern dim, yet it stood like a proud sentinel watching over the ceremony. Lights strung across the square cast a soft golden glow against the dusk sky. Daniel Brooks stood at the center with Rex at his side. The young German shepherd now stronger, heavier, his sleek black and tan coat gleaming even in winter's muted light. Rex sat tall, ears pricked, eyes alert but gentle, embodying a kind of dignity that needed no words. Chief Jacob Mills stepped forward in his formal uniform. Jacob carried an air of authority shaped by decades of service, but tonight his voice held something deeper, something warm. His lined face softened under the lantern glow as he lifted a framed certificate. His breath smoked in the cold air as he spoke. "This town has always relied on good people," Jacob said, his voice deep and steady. "But sometimes, a hero arrives on 4 legs." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Elderly couples leaned into each other. Children leaned over coat sleeves to get a better look at Rex. Emily Parker stood near the front, wrapped in a thick white jacket, her blonde hair tucked beneath a knitted blue hat. She now looked healthy and bright, as if the storm that nearly claimed her belonged to another lifetime. Jacob turned toward Daniel. "Mr. Brooks, for your actions during the rescue, and for giving a home to a creature who proved himself beyond any doubt, the town of Portland officially recognizes Rex as a certified rescue animal under the Portland program." He handed over the certificate. The frame was simple wood, but Daniel held it as if it weighed more than the rifles he once carried. The edges trembled slightly in his hands. Years in the Marines had shaped him into a man who rarely cried, but this moment stirred something deep, something he thought war had taken from him forever. Jacob stepped back. The crowd looked expectantly at Daniel. Daniel cleared his throat. He was not a man of speeches. His face was rugged, with a few more lines than the winter before. His close-cropped brown hair had grown a little, and there was a softer set to his jaw these days, a gentleness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I won't say much," he began, voice steady but low. "Some wounds take longer to heal than anyone expects. For a long time I believed I'd spend the rest of my life alone, trying to outrun nightmares that don't care how far you run." A murmur of empathy swept through the older crowd. Many of them understood grief in their own way. Daniel placed his hand gently on Rex's shoulder. The dog remained perfectly still. Then this little guy showed up in a storm, half frozen, lost, just like me. He paused, swallowing. "I thought I was saving him, but the truth is, he's the one who pulled me out of the dark." Rex turned his head slightly at the sound of Daniel's voice, eyes warm and steady. "And then he saved Emily," Daniel continued, nodding toward the girl in the front row. "Not because he was trained, not because anyone asked him to, but because his heart told him to." Emily stepped forward without hesitation. Her blue eyes shimmered with emotion as she knelt and wrapped her arms around Rex. She was 18, but carried a soft innocence, with a smile that brightened even the harsh winter. "Thank you," she whispered into his fur. "If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here today." Rex leaned into her warmth, tail tapping once against the wooden stage. Applause rose, not a loud cheer, but something deeper, a heartfelt sound. Many in the crowd wiped their eyes, especially the older folks who had lived long enough to understand that life didn't often gift moments so pure. When the ceremony ended, families gathered to greet them. Some brought treats for Rex. Others brought small thank you notes. A retired fisherman named Oliver Graham stepped up next. Oliver was in his early 70s, with a thick white beard and hands calloused from years at sea. His left knee was stiff from an old sailing accident, giving him a slow, uneven gait. His deep-set eyes held a lifetime of storms and quiet wisdom. "Good job, son," Oliver said, clasping Daniel's shoulder with a firm but gentle grip. "That dog of yours, He's something the town won't forget." "Neither will I," Daniel replied. As twilight deepened, the lanterns glimmered like tiny floating stars. Rex sniffed the air, catching scents carried across the ocean. The salt, the cold, the faint aroma of wood smoke drifting from chimneys across the harbor. Later that night, back in the cabin, the warmth of the fireplace filled the small room with a golden hue. The flames crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. Daniel settled into the old armchair with a cup of tea, Rex lying beside the hearth, head resting on his paws. "You came in a storm," Daniel murmured, voice filled with gratitude he never knew how to express. "And you stayed in the quiet. Rex, you're home. You're mine. And I'm yours." Rex lifted his head and pressed it gently against Daniel's knee, a silent vow. The bond between them had grown beyond rescue, beyond companionship. It had become the steady fire keeping both of them alive. Outside, the wind whispered through pine trees along the ridge, but inside the cabin, peace held firm. A man and his dog, two souls who had once been lost, now found warmth in each other's presence. The fire glowed. Rex's eyes reflected the light like amber embers, and Daniel knew, without speaking, that this bond would outlast every storm. In the quiet stillness after every storm, there is always a moment when the world feels touched by something greater than chance. Ethan and Claire did not meet because the wind was cruel or because the snow pushed her toward danger. They met because grace often steps into our lives disguised as hardship, guiding our footsteps toward the very people we need most. Sometimes God works through strangers, through a hand reaching out in the cold, through courage that rises unexpectedly in our hearts. And sometimes He reminds us that even in the harshest winter, warmth will find its way back if we keep our faith steady. This story is not just about land or storms or battles of the heart. It is about the quiet miracles that unfold in everyday life, the ones we often overlook. A second chance, a kind word, a new beginning, the gentle nudge that tells us we are not walking alone. If Ethan could carry Claire through the snow, perhaps we too can carry each other a little more. If Rowan and Sarah could stand up for what is right, perhaps we can be braver in defending the things that matter. And if a man who returned home with a broken past could find hope in the eyes of a woman he barely knew, then maybe God still writes miracles in simple moments. May this story remind you that blessings arrive in many forms, sometimes as family, sometimes as friends, and sometimes as unexpected heroes walking out of a winter storm.